Good evening, councillors. Thank you all for coming. It's an excellent turnout. We're very, very pleased to see you all. I apologise for my shout of jubilation when the IT worked. It's always a good thing, because without the presentation from our friends at Thacum, we really would be crowding round a little screen at the front, which probably wouldn't do what we need to do. We're here to hear from one of our partners, Thacum client, Thacum Homes. They built the Way Court scheme. Some of you will know that in Godalming. And they're currently building our largest scheme that we've done since we have been engaged in our council house building at Otford Ridge, 37 units. Some of you have seen the quality of the work up there. I know members of the executive had a wet, windy but thoroughly enjoyable hour up there just in November. We declared a climate change emergency on the 18th of September last year, and we're working as a council on an action plan and filling that action plan in to see how we can aim to be carbon neutral by 2030. Now, as a council, you'll know we've got a key role in mitigating the effects of climate change. I'm very pleased that it's now becoming on a major player in the world's agenda, certainly in this country. And people are taking it seriously at last. So as a community leader, we as a council, and also through the services we provide, and part of the services, one of the services we provide obviously is housing for our residents and our new build programme. And that's something that included in the action plan, that we can build homes that reflect our aims and objectives as a council under the climate change emergency. And we're going to do all we can to focus on preventing climate change, reducing our emissions on our sites and the services we provide. Thacum, as a developer, are leading the way. I had the privilege week before last of being at Gatwick, their summit. I said to Steve Toohey a moment ago, I could have paid £500, £600 for a conference in London that wouldn't have been the quality of the speakers and the whole emphasis and thrust of what Thacum are doing, looking at the wider agenda of how we can build for the future. So that's enough from me. The format of the evening is very simple. Steve, Josie and Stuart from Thacum are going to present to us probably for half an hour, 40 minutes. Then there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion before we go home. So hopefully we won't be here till 8, but it just depends on the quality of the debate after the presentation. So Steve Toohey is Group Business Development Director. Josie, surname is Thornwell, yes, I'm just checking that, Sustainability Manager. The guy on your left, I've known him since 2008. He's an old mate, Stuart Fullwood, Group Business Director. You needn't take any notes of what he says, because he worked for Wealdon District Council, worked for a housing association, now he's ended up working for Thacum. So actually, to be honest, Stuart can see things from all angles. It's great to have Stuart here as well. So without further ado, hand over to you guys.
Can I just ask, are we going to be sent the presentation?
You can be sent the presentation, Councillor, by all means. Yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for... And I've got used to the microphone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. And present to you tonight. Before I hand over to Josie, who's going to take you through the presentation, which hopefully you will find helpful and informative, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit to explain about Thacum and how we're viewing certain matters around sustainability. So Thacum is 3 distinct businesses. It is a strategic land promoter and housing developer, and we are also a contract builder. So as a strategic land promoter, we identify sites, we promote them through local plans, and we ultimately seek to get planning permission, then build them out and sell them as a house builder. At the moment, as it stands, we have about 50,000 plots under option, and that's predominantly in the southeast and in the northern home counties. As a contract builder, we exclusively build for the public sector. So that is to say, we build for councils and we build for housing associations. And indeed, Andrew just alluded to, we've completed your scheme successfully at Way Court in Godalming, and currently we're building at Oxford Ridge. And obviously we're keen to do more in due course. As a contract builder, we like to think we have an understanding of what councils and housing associations require, and partly that's led us to being here today. As a builder developer, we're starting to have our customers come to us saying, what are you doing about sustainability? What are you doing about carbon zero? How are you going to make your homes more sustainable? What's the running cost for me to live in them? And all these questions are being posed to us. And over the last 18 months, we've seen a real sea change in terms of how our public sector clients and our private buyers are viewing the world of sustainability. So what we wanted to walk you through today is some of the concepts, some of the proposals that we're going to be trialling for ourselves as a house builder, some of the new technologies that are coming to the market that may well help to meet some of the zero carbon targets that we will be setting ourselves as a business, and also in terms that we will see roll out into wider society. And hopefully you will find this presentation informative and maybe to take away some of the myths and some of the stereotypes that are out there, incorrectly misunderstanding this subject matter. There will be a Q&A at the end of it, so hopefully we'll have a good debate and some wide-ranging array of questions that we will do our best. Can't say we will, but we'll do our best to answer them for you. So, Josie, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you today. My background is I've been working in sustainability for 6 years, and I came from it from a civil engineering angle to start off with. So the technical knowledge, hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions for you. But I think this is a great opportunity. It's great to have such a captive audience of people that are really interested in this. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, wouldn't have had the audience. So this is great. And I think it brings out the best in companies like Fakem, because there is so much that we can achieve. It's just making sure that we do it right and that it works for the customers as well. So the bigger picture stuff. So there's the UK government targets, there's the Committee on Climate Change report on UK housing, the Clean Growth Strategy and the Future Home Strategy. All of these point to a specific design. They talk about zero emissions, they talk about efficiency, and they talk about timber frame buildings. And there's a big thing about low carbon heating and, again, energy efficiency. So all of the knowledge at the moment is pointing down a specific angle, and that doesn't match up with how traditional housing is built at the moment. So there's definitely a need to do it. Obviously, on the local picture, Andrew mentioned about Waverley Borough Council declaring climate emergency. It's great. I've read the documents on it, and I also think it's quite interesting that you put it in there. You didn't forget about things like biodiversity, that you didn't get just drawn in by the word carbon. Because I think it's very easy to get too focused on this, but you've got to look holistically about this. It's about making better developments, essentially. So we can talk about all the elements of that. So Fakem Group are currently developing their sustainability strategy. That's why I'm here. And these are likely to be our strategic themes. These are important for communicating the shared vision that we want to we hope to share with our stakeholders. They're things that are very important, and particularly the first one I'll go into more detail with today. But to achieve these, we have to do some serious engagement with our supply chain. This year, our supply chain conference was pretty much focused on sustainability. It was a core thing of every single speech from each of the speakers. And what I found most interesting, this was only my first week of starting at Fakem, but listening to the conversations between companies after that, and having a chat to people and talking to, between housing associations and kitchen fitters, they all had something to say and had already said, we've been thinking about this, but we just don't know where to start. And I think it takes people like developers and like councils to be the instigator for actually making change. So out of those strategic themes, there were some key commitments made, 3 main commitments made at the supply chain conference. These are industry leading, absolutely. So each of these sets us 25 years ahead of the UK government targets. Our ability to achieve that first commitment is primarily why I'm here to speak to you today, but I understand there's some interest in the room around embodied carbon or life cycle analysis. So I've put a bit of that in, and we can talk about it at the end if you've got any specific questions. So with the first one, from 2025, every Thacum home will be zero carbon in its operation. Now, definitions are really important here about what that actually means. So we use the principles from the UK Green Building Council's report. This came out last year, and then they're going to be building on it this year with a framework for what's called net zero ready homes. So to say that you're zero carbon, you have to annually report and monitor the energy consumption. But if we're, as a developer, handing over a project, we don't have the ability to do that. So zero carbon home to us is the technical term is net zero ready, which means that, you know, all of the ability is there for anything in the SAP report, which is your heating, your ventilation, your lighting, so everything other than their TVs and their fridge and stuff like that, that we're not in control of. To our utmost control, it is a zero carbon home. So to do that, we reduce energy use primarily, and then we increase renewable energy supply, so photovoltaics, and then offsetting any remaining carbon. That's likely to be things like their gadgets and things like that, which you would do by having a green tariff, so that all of the energy that they do use is from a renewable source. So, so the core part of achieving this is that you have to embrace modern technology. There's only so much you can do with traditional house building methods. So we've developed an off-site panelised system and built our first project with success. Is it going on the screen? Is it working? Brilliant. Okay. I promise it's smoother than that in real life, but it just seems to be a bit staggered. So the sideline benefit of using an off-site panelised system is that it will give you the largest achievable reduction in embodied carbon, because you're switching from brick, which obviously fired in a kiln at 3,000 degrees centigrade, to moving to timber that not only has a low embodied carbon because of the processing uses less carbon emissions, but also as it's grown as a tree, it's sequestered carbon into the product. So we are also investigating life cycle costs. So that second commitment around production and being carbon neutral in production, we'll do that by using a life cycle analysis tool. So you have to embrace modern construction, and we've chosen an off-site panelised system because we think it works best. The other ways of doing it, you've got to look at the envelope first, the envelope of the building being things like glazing, modern methods of construction I've already mentioned, and increasing insulation. There's no point having the most amazing gadgets inside if you still can't improve your airtightness, you still can't do the basics. So you have to look at the outside first. And modern methods of construction does mean that we can improve airtightness, but with saying that, we're not looking to wrap a house up in plastic, because actually we think that for customers, you end up with some ventilation problems. It's so much more different to use for a customer, and I think you then add more problems on than you end up solving. I think if I lived in a house wrapped in plastic, I'd probably be okay, but you know, the normal person just wants to the house to instantly get warmer. So I don't think it works to do it any other way but through modern methods of construction.
So, Josie, just stopping there. So to be clear, yes, thank you for reminding me. Thank you. So to be clear, we're taking a panelised system. So we're making walls, we're making floor cassettes in a factory, and then we are bringing those to site. And what you saw there on the video clip was our first attempt to erect a house using this panelised system. Sorry, three houses in a day to make it watertight and meet all of the requirements that Josie's talking about. Now, you can see from the end of the clip that darkness descended and the poor weather came in and we didn't quite get there, but this is the journey that we're on to be able to do this, because if we can then make it watertight within a day, we can leave site and know that when it rains, it did that evening, we're not allowing that plot to then get completely drenched and then having to spend days, possibly weeks, then with whopping great heaters, having to dry it out. You think how those heaters are going to be generated, that's not helping the carbon neutral agenda that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So it seems ridiculous that we're building houses out of brick in a muddy field, letting them get really wet, then having to dry them out and manage all the defects that come from that. So here we're trying this new system where it's all made in the factory. We know it's millimetre perfect when it all gets clipped together on site. It is watertight, and there's also the benefits in terms of the speed of delivery that we can deliver for you, our customer, as a result of that. Sorry, JC.
That's great, thank you. So, secondly, talking about energy, mechanical ventilation heat recovery basically takes the warmth out of the stale air in the house and pre-warms the fresh filtered air that comes into the house. So you're reducing the amount of wasted heat. The Recoup pipe is great, the one in the middle. There's no maintenance or electrical components. Basically, if you think about all of the energy used to heat up your water that's in the shower, and actually that water's on you for about 2 seconds, 3 seconds most, and then that heat is going down the drain. So what the Recoup pipe does is it's a pipe around the outside of your shower waste pipe, and it uses it takes the heat out of that and pre-warms your cold water coming in. So what you'll notice, you'll turn on the shower, heat will be on you, go down the drain, and then it will pre-warm that, and you'll suddenly notice your shower temperature gets a bit warmer, because actually your boiler's kicking out the same energy, but there's less of a temperature difference.
And the cost of that is minimal, isn't it?
Yeah. It's so simple, which is why I like it. And when you think about all the energy that does go on you just to heat the water that's on you for 2 seconds, I think it makes sense. Final one on there is renewable technology. So PV in particular is really cost effective now, even without the feed-in tariff. It's the biggest impact you can make on reducing the carbon emissions from this building. And then finally, looking at actually delivering new heat, I guess, to the building. This is a balance between minimalising the maintenance, so obviously we're trying to reduce pipe lengths and things like that, but also if you delivered everything using electric heating, it's likely to be quite expensive for the customer, so there's a balance to be made there. So what we've looked at is infrared heaters, which are really cool, they're really efficient. What they do is they heat the object in front of it rather than the air around. So it just means that you could have those, you can get a mirrored one, so you can have it in the bathroom. Rooms like that are spot on for it, but then the rest of the house, you'd want a wet distribution system, your kind of normal radiators. But the difference with these is that we run them at a lower temperature. So what that means is they can be slightly deeper because you need a right surface area to give out the same amount of heat. But by running it at a low temperature, your boiler's being more efficient, and it allows you to future-proof it for when you get to the point where these houses need to be retrofitted with things like air source heat pumps, because you don't want to use gas anymore, or it's just better, you want them to be electrically delivered completely. Air source heat pumps work at low temperature differences, so by putting this in now, it means that it's ready for the future when you go to upgrade. So given what was in your declaration of a climate emergency and the points that talked about in there, and looking beyond the technicalities of what a zero carbon home is, I wanted to reflect on some other points. Happy to talk about these in more detail if you want, just take a note of it and then we can go back to it. But rainwater harvesting, rain gardens, landscaping in particular, I know that there's some interesting climate positive design. We believe we can provide something similar based on the principles of this system. And education, I think, is really important because this is like a new product to some people. So more than happy to provide training for your in-house team to be able to deliver resident drop-in sessions. Also helps you guys identify anyone that is in fuel poverty or things like that. And it could just preemptive helps with issues with anyone that needs help. And then finally, some additional considerations around energy and transport. So the top row is basically your future-proof elements that are, they might seem a bit futuristic, but there's plenty of testing and products that are on the market for you to be able to pick the right one. And the second row are great ones to enable occupants to reduce their own carbon footprint. LiftShare, we're trialling it in, we've got it at Peace Pottage, one of the Thacum Homes projects, and in the office, and you can see how many carbon emissions are reduced by people sharing lifts. It's just a really good facilitator for that. Car charging and cycle storage there as well. So all, not necessarily zero carbon home points, but things that we think are really important.
Just on the battery point, So what we're looking at is, as a developer, is obviously you've got PV panels on the roof, sunny day, generating lots of electricity, helping to help utilise the electricity demands within your property, or possibly feed it back to the grid if you had feed-in tariffs. But then after that, it's just gone. So we're looking at having batteries installed in our new homes that will then just store the electricity that's being generated off from the PV panels, so it's there when you need it. It's not wasted. And then we're looking to take it one stage further on some of our larger housing estates, having like a battery area, a battery farm, where there's a whole number of these that are contained on part of the site that will store electricity for the wider estate infrastructure. So the battery technology, as it's moving on and is coming on, and the ability to store more for less cost is rapidly changing. And we can see this as being a real way of complementing PV panels, because at the moment PV are great, but potentially you could be losing electricity if you don't need it and it's generating more than you can use on a summer's day.
Yep.
How you can store that is a real opportunity.
So the recent report on the costs and benefits of tighter standards for new building, it shows that upfront investment is really important. Considering that you own these buildings for a long amount of time, I think this is an important point for you guys. And talking about other councils, I don't know if you're aware of Goldsmith Street from Norwich. Amazing project, really good. And it was interesting that I think Norwich City Council made a point of telling people, yes, we accepted that it was more expensive because we know that over 30 years they're gonna see the benefit of it, and they're the first council to make people aware that actually it's worth it. So I think that's a real turning point as well for people to think in their minds of that one. So here's the nitty-gritty detail bit. So sorry about all the words, but this is the technical solution. We've got a wealth of experience in Thacum, but the important thing is, this is just a technical problem, and we're good at solving those. But it's about making it so that it's in a customer-friendly package, right? So we have to say this bit, but hopefully the rest of the stuff that I explain makes it understandable. But so this is based on house type A at Oxford Ridge. So this is a house that we've already built. We've taken that and gone, right, if we were going to make that zero carbon and we were going to build it tomorrow, what would we have to do? So it's all of the things that I've spoken to you about. You can see on their PV panels at the bottom makes the biggest impact, and actually relating to its cost, again, it makes the biggest impact, but all of those other things are really important. So if you took house type A, put the numbers in the calculator, it comes out with 1,450 kilograms of CO2 per year. If we implement all of those things, it takes that down to zero. So the thing is if I say 1,450 kilograms of CO2 per year, that's hard to visualise and imagine the significance of this. So I've tried to put it into some different numbers for you. So 1,450 per house every year. If you times that by 37, so just talked about Oxford Ridge Site B, that's 53,650 kilograms. Actually, there's another 83 remaining plots on that development, so let's times it by that and see what we get to, and it's about 120 tonnes of CO2. Again, really hard to visualise, so what I've done is I've turned it into some other stuff for you. So 120 tonnes of CO2 per year is the same as 168 mature pine trees, so 50 years old. I did ask our architect, and that is pretty much to scale, that tree, just in terms of size. It's a commercial European pine tree. That's 25 metres tall. And it's the equivalent of 236 cars off the road every year. So hopefully that gives you the information that you need to kind of appreciate the value in this proposal and what it means. Yeah, so the cost uplift of 22,100 per plot is delivering all of the things on the left here. So that uplift, the amount that it costs us to do that, is 22,000. Now, there are obviously all of those other things that we can add into it that gives you that holistic picture on what sustainability is, but we thought we'd give you the, the proper nitty-gritty detail, right? So, happy to take any questions you've got. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. About 15 years ago, we built some energy efficient houses down in Hazelmere.
Yeah.
And we found that, unfortunately, the tenants or owners afterwards couldn't afford any maintenance or repair. In fact, I saw myself at one point a boiler thrown outside because the boiler had collapsed. It wasn't under warranty or guarantee by that time, and they couldn't afford to replace it. Are there that sort of costings in this sort of system you're devising, or is it something that isn't a problem?
If you have a look at actually what we're changing, the majority of it is the building envelope. So that's not something that is a short-term maintenance issue. On boilers, obviously we choose the highest quality that hopefully it is easily maintainable, easy to get parts. This isn't, we're not installing air source heat pumps that are all of a sudden a new technology. This is just refining the product down to a point and adding things like PV, MVHR, obviously wastewater heat recovery I've talked about doesn't have any maintenance requirements. We're trying to deliver a product that is customer friendly, so hopefully you wouldn't have that problem. It depends what company you talk to. You can expect any company that you look at, you'll have a solar degradation, so each cell, they expect a percentage of those to kind of die off every year. But what they do is the percentage that we look at of how efficient it is isn't in the first 5 years, it's the 5 to 10 years. So we're expecting a good case scenario rather than the best case scenario. So we've allowed for that. Yes?
Yeah, I absolutely get and understand the need and importance as we create new housing units, because houses have come to the end of their useful life and we're replacing them, or we're just building new housing and so on. But most people, of course, live in houses that are a million miles away from that vision. And what I'm trying to understand and get my head around is how do we move forward in that respect? I mean, is it actually an economic proposition, in your view, to be able to convert the traditional gas central heat, traditional house to meet those standards and targets? Or are we looking at waiting till they come to the end of their useful life? I mean, I'm trying to think very realistically about where, as both an authority and as a nation, we go forward on this. That was my first question. The other one, very quick and simple, if I can just log it. Yeah. You talk about moving away from brick to wood. With visions of fires and things in housing and so on. I just have a question as to how far you've tested the robustness of all of that, because I think we've made lots of mistakes sometimes as a society in going headlong down one route because it's clearly the right thing to do and creating other problems going forward.
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question about existing housing stock. It wasn't that many years ago that we moved from coal-fired heating of housing to gas, and it was because of a dissatisfaction with the current situation. I think it's obviously a very different circumstance, but we'll see fluctuations in energy prices. We might see that because of the decarbonisation of the grid, that we're more likely to want to go down a pure electric housing heating system. So I think that's what will drive that change rather than anything else. Your existing housing stock makes up the majority of houses. Actually, new build houses, probably only talking about 2 or 3% of everything, right? Yeah, it's a big issue. And there are things that you can do to kind of like a patchwork system for those housing stock, but ultimately you can't get around the fact that the modern methods of construction are the way to do it. Yeah, well, that's why feed-in tariffs and stuff, that's what's designed for, isn't it? Yeah.
So your point about timber frame, obviously very valid. Fire is a massive news item at the moment, and everyone is very aware that there have been a few big fires. The biggest culprit of those fires is not the fact it was built with timber frame, it was how the timber frame was built. So fire socks and things like that. And it's like with anything, if you build it badly, it won't work properly. I would take you back 400 years, all houses in this country were built from timber frame. A lot of them are still standing. So timber frame per se is not the problem. and it is still the best material that we can use to be carbon neutral. As Rose said earlier on, we can plant trees, and in this country we now have a policy, I think I might still say, to plant 2 trees for every one we fell. So actually we're getting year on year more trees, and therefore it's the obvious thing to make houses out of. There are things we can do to mitigate it, and our panelled system will be more finished than a timber frame. So the inside plasterboard will already be fitted, the outside sheathing will be already fitted, and we are intending to put the plumbing and electrics via looms into the panels. So we've looked at the car industry, how they make a car, and they have wiring looms, and therefore we're going to have those in our wall panels that you'll just have a clipping system where it all comes together like an octopus, and that will then liven up the panels. So that will mitigate some of the issue with fire during erection, but it will come down also to having a robust fire plan as to how you're going to overcome the dangers of it. But a lot of people will be looking at MMC as pre-finished, containerised units. But unfortunately with those, 95% of what you're moving around the roads is air. And that's not sustainable. So all we've done is taken a container effectively and folded it flat. And when we get back to site, we put those panels back up. So we do see that as the most viable solution. People have tried lots of other solutions and they've come and they've gone. Timber frame has been around now for hundreds of years. And this is just an advancement of that system.
Yes.
I had Councillor Baker, then Councillor Adams, Councillor Blishen and Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Fiona.
Well, thank you. I'm Councillor Baker, top of that list. This just raises whole loads of questions. And to start with, I have to apologise for arriving late, so I missed the first 7 minutes. So if I'm asking a question you've covered, please forgive me. Obviously, I live in a house. I'm trying to envisage how different my life would be if I moved into a Thacum home. So the first thing I want to ask really is about the customer appeal. I haven't heard yet what happens inside the house and how the inside surfaces are treated, because you've just said this is a shell. I haven't heard anything about double glazing, but that might be my fault for not being here. I would like to know if you're just doing standard double glazing. If you're putting all the services and the plumbing in the panels, does that mean that you can't vary the layout of kitchens and bathrooms, for instance, or where lights go? The mind boggles, actually. And I'm assuming that you wouldn't have the beloved open fire because it's a chimney, it requires a chimney, and it's going to discharge all sorts into the atmosphere. Those are only a few of my questions. Thank you.
How the envelope is made up. It's triple glazing, absolutely. You've got to address that finish first. So the envelope of the building is a timber panelised system. And yeah, definitely triple glazing, I think, is obviously the way forward. Do you want to answer on layout?
Your points on layout are very valid. I mean, of course, you've got to standardise things to make them easier to build, quicker to build, and if you start moving things around, it slows down the process. But with a panelised system, there is no reason why you can't vary it later in its life, in its use. But we have to have a starting point that delivers what we think the customer wants. You asked the point, are people getting on board with it? And I think the answer is yes. We are now getting, certainly the younger generation are starting to ask questions. You know, is my house green? How does my boiler work? What's the efficiency? They're not just wanting to get a home. They are now starting to want a home that performs, to the levels. And there's a lot more, if you like, green people around nowadays than there were 20 years ago. It's become the on-topic thing that's going on at the moment. So, yes, we will have to standardise house types, and we will make them as flexible as possible. And the advantage with a clipping thing is you just clip in a new loom whenever you need it and draw it through the walls. So it's not a new concept. It's like your car. If your headlights go, you can draw a new wire for and have a different headlight. So we can accommodate changes to design, but it will have to start from a standard design.
And talking about customer appeal again, a lot of these things just make a home convenient. The house is not gonna, you're not gonna walk in and it's gonna be freezing cold. You're not gonna wake up in the middle of the night and it's gonna be freezing cold. You're always gonna have PV running. You can use it whenever you want. It's not like you're paying for a green tariff which has got some solar panels that are like 100 miles away. This is about convenience and it all being part of one system. All of this has to be integrated. They're all just individual parts until we build them. So. This is a whole house solution.
It's also worth pointing out that at the moment what we're talking about is the running cost of the house.
Yep.
There is also, of course, the carbon consumed during the actual manufacture of the house itself. Now, we can only control part of that process. You touched on bricks earlier on. We buy bricks from a brick manufacturer who burns bricks at 3,000 degrees or whatever. We don't and can't influence how green he is in his production. All we can do is make sure the measures that we take on site try to use the best and most economic material from a carbon point of view. So our standard 3-bedroom house consumes 50 tonnes of carbon in its manufacture at the moment. Of that, 15% is our site waste. So we've now come up with measures to change our site waste. We've got it down from 15% to 5%. That 10% saving equates to 5 tonnes of carbon. So just by looking at our waste strategy, we've managed to get our house 5 tonnes better on carbon. If we can do that 3 or 4 times, we will get it down to a number, and I can't tell what that number is at the moment, but if we got it down to 10 tonnes, we can then offset the balance by planting a number of trees, hopefully on the scheme as well, to mitigate the remainder of the carbon. It's going to be a long while before we can build a zero carbon house in its construction, because I say we don't control all the bits that go into it.
I think Councillor Adams next and then Councillor Blishen.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to return to the question that was asked earlier about fire. I mean, most of the houses now, which are separated by brick, rather than... I noticed in the houses you were building there, they were obviously a group of houses.
Correct.
So what do you actually do to make it more secure if in the unlikely event, one house does catch fire, to stop it spreading through the whole group?
There is, the party walls have a fire separation, and in that case it will be a minimum of 1 hour, possibly more. So they are, if you like, a robust detail. At the end of the day, if a house burns down, the crucial thing is to get the people out. Houses can be rebuilt, the people can't. So our first priority is to make sure that the way we design houses and build them, the people can get out first. An hour's separation in a 2-storey house is an awful long time. That should allow everyone to get out very, very safely before the fire jumps from one property to the other. And that goes all the way out through the roof as well, where you've got your gable panels meeting. You don't want the fire to jump. So, as I pointed out earlier on, the issue is building them correctly so that the fire prevention is built into the structure, so that you get the time to get people out. You know, ultimately timber will burn. You can't disguise it, it does burn. But as long as the house is built correctly, the time that you get to get out of the house will be more than sufficient to save everyone.
It's also the time it will take to burn, but how you can then contain that fire within a very strict area by all the fire stops that go in place.
But do you put sprinklers in, for instance?
Sorry?
Sprinklers in, for instance?
We don't put 2-storey housing, again, normally, worst case scenario, you can jump out the first floor window. You may potentially break a leg or something, but you can. 3-storey flats obviously have fire doors as standard. We wouldn't normally put sprinklers in. Sprinklers are only recommended above, I think it's 11 metres at the moment. So we are, most of the work we do is below that. If we go above that, we will put sprinklers in.
Good evening. I've got three questions actually. First off, I'm wondering what the shelf life of the house is as it's prefabricated. Obviously, it's very high quality design, but that does come into it. The second thing is, this is Surrey. People love extending their houses. I'm wondering if it's possible to extend these efficiently without destroying the zero carbon. And thirdly, because of the construction of this house, I wondered if there might have been mortgage and insurance problems down the line. Thank you.
I think they probably all sit with me. Going in reverse order, the mortgageability, obviously timber frame has been around for an awful long while. There is absolutely no issue with timber frame houses, and our panelised system is only a version of a timber frame house. So that's fine. In terms of adapting it in its future use, timber's probably the most easily timber to adapt. Because you know, if you've got a brick-built house and you want to put extension, you've got to knock down a wall, insert an RSJ, etc., etc. Here, it's timber. You cut out your timber panel, you may have to insert a couple of extra props in timber to support it, and then you go out to where you're going, and your extension could be timber framed as well. Sorry, your third point was?
Ensure.
I go back to what I said earlier on. Timber frames have been around an awful long while. I'm not just talking about the current way. I'm talking about Tudor houses that have stood for 300-400 years. If it's built right, if it's got the correct measures for moisture, etc., etc., there is no reason why it won't have the same shelf life as a masonry-built house.
Councillor Williams, Councillor Keane, then Councillor Cole for the next lot.
Hi, Steve Williams. I'm the portfolio holder for Environment and Sustainability. So if I can be indulged just to say thank you very much for the presentation and for taking account of our direction of travel so far as the Council is concerned in terms of our climate emergency response. But my particular, the thing that particularly struck me in the presentation was the slide that actually demonstrated, you know, how things could change in terms of 1,450 tonnes of CO2 at a cost uplift of 22,100 per plot. Now, you know, to me, those figures kind of really sort of stick in the mind, and it makes it a very, very compelling case in terms of looking forward. Obviously, the issue that we are all wrestling with is the issue of retrofitting. And what was really interesting in terms of the breakdown of benefits that you gave was in relation to the 70% PV effect, if you like, in terms of carbon saving. And I think that's you know, very significant. And clearly that's something that one should be looking to in terms of retrofitting homes that are currently not adapted in the way that they should be. So I suppose my question to you is, well, I suppose the aside is that it would be helpful, would it not, if we had the incentive of of the feed-in tariff, which has been slashed from us in terms of encouragement for sort of PV fitting. However, in the absence of that strong feed-in tariff incentive, which was there in the past and has been taken away, what we have to look to is the storage of the energy and battery storage. So I suppose my question is around trying to do what you were sort of beginning to do, which was the sort of look at the future-proofing issues. And do you have any comments on the developments in terms of battery storage and where that is likely to be in the next 2 or 3 years, both in terms of the sustainability of the batteries themselves, because they are certainly not zero carbon in production, but also in terms of their efficiency and efficacy?
And that's getting a highly efficient house already, reducing that by 50%. If you're putting that on an older building, that's going to be one of many things you have to do. It's not necessarily going to be 70% of a difference that makes on that house. So I think that's important to pick out. You mentioned the feed-in tariff a lot. Obviously that was introduced in 2010 and it did get cut. However, there is a smart export guarantee, which is essentially the same thing. What it means this way is that it is a guarantee that the top energy providers have to provide you with a tariff for when you sell them energy. That tariff varies with different providers. I've put the top 6 up on there for you. Generally, we tend to supply people with Eon Energy, and it's good to see that they're in the top 3, so that's great. It's 5.5p, which is fairly comparable with what you were getting on the feed-in tariff. The only difference with this is there are no set or minimum tariff, so there is no guarantee that it'll always be there or how much it will be. So you're right to say that in the event that that did drop away, and in the event that there was nothing else, battery storage is your next viable option to make the best use of your energy. So PV is great, except it is giving you energy in the middle part of the day when it's nice and sunny and you're probably at work and you're not there to use the energy. So battery storage is just that. Store up everything that's being saved whilst you're not there and use it to charge your car, cook your dinner, whatever you want in the evening. The products out there are great now. Okay, Tesla have some very nice, pretty ones, but they're very expensive. Same with their cars, actually. But the next best, I like there's PowerVolt is a good one, and they've been quite clever about it. They've made it the same size as your standard washing machine, so it fits in a kitchen unit, which is where we've got, it's usually in close proximity to your main board, so it's fairly easy to wire up as well. So retrofit-wise, you just pick the right product. Pick the right product that works, it integrates with what we've currently got. You can fix it into a cassette panel so you've got it on a separate circuit. Whatever you need, technically, there will be a product that delivers that, because there has to be, because there will be that gap.
I think the point you make, that they are very expensive at the moment. They're, I think ballpark about £4,000 for an average house. It is coming down quite quickly, and the technology is getting better. I think your point about batteries aren't green, they're not. Bolt and wheels that goes in a battery at the moment is very unfriendly, but they are working on an all-metal battery and things like that. So the technology changes year on year, but there will come a point, I think, where if the battery has a long enough life, the write-off time for a battery, if it's £4,000, it can last for 20 years, starts to become...
Councillor Keane, then Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Yes, one question I have is that it's very nice to see that, wood cladding on housing rather than brick, and, it's very sustainable. The only question that I would have on that is, how the upkeep of the wood would be done, because you do see some houses where they've got this wood cladding, and if it's not looked after, it can become extremely shabby, and that's a concern that I would have. And I think you've already answered the other question I had on batteries, because I do worry terribly. Everybody's talking about battery-operated cars, battery this and battery that. Where do all these batteries end up? And it's quite a frightening thought, really. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've mentioned timber frame housing. We're not limiting what can go on the outside of the house, so we could use brick slips. So, okay, it's still a brick, but you're only using 25% of the brick, 30% or whatever, rather than the whole brick, so you're going to get 3 times as much out of a brick, which obviously is better. We can do artificial timber boarding now, which has a very, very long shelf life and looks identical. We can do tiles in clay, but again, that's digging out of the ground, and burning it. But we're not trying to limit how a house looks, or we'll just end up with every house looking exactly the same. So we're trying to look at as many different types, and there will be other finishes that come forward, I think, in the near future, as people wise up to the fact that perhaps bricks will have their day because they are just so energy consuming.
On your point about batteries, we have got the waste electrical and electronic equipment, I think that's right, law, which basically means it's the producer's responsibility. At the end of its life, it is their responsibility to find something to do with that. So I don't know about schemes that exist at the moment, but it is certainly something that by law that they have to look at. But I think they'll be much more well publicised as the product becomes more available. The other thing that I expect might change is that rather than it being something that you buy, is used in your house and then it degrades and you have then to get rid of it, I think you'll see more systems where you hire them for the certain amount of time. It's kind of a lease scheme rather than a purchase. That system certainly works more for making sure that all of these elements that go into this battery are kind of kept in the loop, so to speak. Okay.
Okay, a couple of points. I noticed that you had air source heat pumps as an upgrade rather than a today technology. Is that purely because of the cost of the gas boilers are still very cheap comparatively? And secondly, on mechanical heat recovery, I was understanding that, well, I heard discussion that there are some health impacts of that potentially because of the reduced airflow through the house. Perhaps you can comment on that point also.
Yeah, so air source heat pumps, this is based off of the 2013 building regs. And now we expect that to change probably at the end of this year, and it will force most developers' hand into producing more electrically delivered schemes. So because this is based off 2013 building regs, which is current building regs, that's why this was the most effective. That's the most effective solution at the moment. That's not to say that that won't change when the government changes their targets. So that's why. It's not necessarily because it's cost prohibitive, but if you want to achieve zero carbon at the most effective way, at the most effective cost, the best thing that we can do for you is lower the temperature of the radiators so that it's ready. On the MVHR point, that certainly depends on how you commission it more than anything. You know, essentially, your indoor air quality should be like 5 times better than it should be outside. You can put filter systems in there. You need to maintain them. That's a good point. And it's all about the commissioning to make sure it is set up right.
Just a point on your air source heat pump, of course, 2025 is when gas boilers in new homes have to stop, and therefore there needs to be a solution by that date, and it's no point waiting 2024 to come up with a solution. We need to be thinking about it now. Air source heat pumps haven't got the greatest reliability. We spoke about infrared panels. That's something we're looking at as a alternative, and I think there will be other things come to the market probably the next year or so. But at the moment, there is no one solution that anyone is proposing to replace a gas boiler. So there is a lot of work to be done on that still.
Okay, Councillor Seaborn, then Councillor Goodridge and Councillor Isherwood.
Right, thank you. Question of operability. So, you know, this is a new kind of house. I've heard stories with the passive house solution that it's not always suited to people who struggle with technology or the discipline of keeping windows shut. Is your solution going to be very easy, particularly, you know, from the social housing perspective with our more challenged residents, the older people confronted with something new? Are we going to be able to plug and play with our residents as well as with the technology?
That's exactly why I try to make a point of we're not wrapping a house in plastic, because that's essentially what passive house is. There's a reason we haven't gone down that route. It is very efficient. It's an amazing standard, and I think I'd be okay living there, but certainly my parents wouldn't be able to cope. Yeah, there is a reason we haven't done that, is to make it a customer-friendly package that is easy to operate and convenient and makes sense for them. Goldsmith Street is a passive house scheme, and the only detriment they've had is that they've had some customers that just didn't really know how to work it. But that's also why I put in there in the additional considerations about providing training for your in-house team, so that if you do have any issues, that it's easily solved. This isn't a difficult technology to grasp. It's just a lower temperature radiator system and just a couple of bits, really. That it should function pretty much as a normal house.
I think your concern probably is the technology linked into phones and things like that. And I think what we found a lot is a lot of people want a very simple system. They want a thermostat on the wall that says warmer or colder. They don't want it coming on Monday at 9 and going off Tuesday at 2. They just want a very simple system. So we are going back to basics as much as we can to make the control simple. So if you want it, we can make it technical. You can have an Alexa, you can have whatever you want, running everything in your house. But as you rightly said, there are certain people who won't be able to cope with that. So we need to start from a bit like a car. You start with the basics. If you want heated seats and all that, we can add it on. But we're going to try and make sure that the controls themselves are user-friendly.
I think it's worth just dwelling on your point around the operational use. I mean, in a previous life, Andrew and I have been installed in new developments underfloor heating, which was, you know, a great technology. But because we didn't spend the time explaining to the residents the usage of underfloor heating, the resident was expecting to touch the floor and it to feel warm. And it wasn't, because that's what they were used to with radiators. So therefore they'd turn it up. And because within half an hour or an hour, unlike with a radiator, they didn't feel that, they would turn it up and up. And then suddenly you'd get 5 or 6 hours later and they were back on the phone. Rather than complaining it was too cold, it was too hot, and they couldn't then turn it down because they weren't understanding the lag issues with underfloor heating. So as soon as we spent time going back and explaining how it is set to work effectively, and you shouldn't really need to touch it, let alone touch it and expect to have instantaneous change in the heat setting, some of those problems operationally fell away. So that as much as we are talking about new technology and new concepts, which will be great about explaining to the end user clearly and coherently how it works in life cycle terms, I think is equally as important, and it shouldn't be underestimated.
One of your slides made it clear that one of the ingredients for a carbon neutral house was a larger floor slab. Now I assume we're talking about a thicker concrete base?
Thicker insulation, not concrete.
Not concrete,
No, the concrete
insulation.
itself is fine, it's the insulation in the floor to stop the heat loss through the floor.
Right, so
What we're
there's...
trying to do is make the whole envelope more thermally efficient. And obviously the floor is very, very important. I don't think heat rises, but you lose an awful lot goes through the floor as well.
So you wouldn't be anticipating more concrete in the slab?
No.
Thank you.
Not at all. Possibly less.
Very quickly, in this day of rain, just wonder your thoughts on rainwater capture, i.e. somewhere like Bermuda, of course, that's compulsory. Also grey water use. And finally, you only have to go a couple of miles outside Waverley to somewhere like Rushmore, where you've got 5, 6-storey blocks of flats. I wonder how your systems are going to work there.
So I think rainwater harvesting has been absolutely overlooked by many developers, that all they do is stick a water butt on the back and maybe you'll use it for landscaping. Now, really, that's nothing, is it? All you're doing is once that's full, it's full. It's not any benefit to the local rivers and trying to slow down flooding. And it's also really, people are still using their hoses. So if you're going to do it, you've got to do it right. Now, you need a suitable capacity and you've got to know what you're using it for. Are you wanting to use it to flush the toilets? Or which is a difficult system for people to get their heads around. Personally, I haven't got a problem with it, but the idea of it, you've got to have a pump system that then goes up to the roof. You've got to have a storage tank, and then it's gravity fed into your toilets. So there is a system that you can build in. There are some products already available on the market that have very nice boxes that sit in a utility cupboard that do all the pumping system for you. It's not something we've included in this because you've really got to have a passion for it to want to put this in. But you're right, I think if there wasn't such a big issue on carbon and there was on water shortage or flooding, then maybe we'd be having a separate presentation.
I think you have a point about the height we build to. Timber frame or timber panel systems only really work to 3 or 4 stories. Beyond that, you do start to get into loads that you can't contain within that. We would then have to revert to either a steel or concrete frame system. But what we would do is make that as firmly efficient as we can, so all these other benefits we've spoken about still feed in. So while the frame may consume more carbon in its manufacture, we can mitigate it, a lot of it in other areas, green roofs, things like that.
Josie, is there also an issue in terms of grey water recycling and kind of the long-term asset management? There's been problems in the past. Sorry. Has there been problems in the past in terms of grey water recycling and asset management related issues?
All of a sudden, it's a lot more pipes and a lot more pumps. Yeah. Really. It does make things an awful lot more difficult.
So again, where I've seen it installed in the past, we found the housing association in question actually then turned off the whole water recycling system after 18 months because of the asset management costs for them as the landlord of maintaining it.
Okay, we've got Councillor Townsend, then Councillor Hess, Patrick Arthurs, and then Councillor Penny Marriott and Peter Marriott.
Thank you. About the modern methods of construction, obviously government's pushing MMC, and we know there's a skills shortage in the building world. There's a brick shortage, so it's still using the world's resources, which is trees, rather than the bricks, and concentrating on one thing is probably not a good thing, especially if all builders are going to be doing it. Now, within the UK, we've only got a couple of sites where they're actually building the modules, haven't we? There's a couple of sites in the UK. So where are you going to be getting your wood from? How sustainable is that? Where are you going to be getting your MMC done? You know, where's it being shipped from? And if it's also to do with the people that are creating it as well. So who is going to be creating your modules, and are they going to have the correct workers' rights? Because there is concern about slave trade within this actual market as well. So my concern is that, I mean, it's still using resources, and there are, as well as the MMC, there are bricks now being trialled that are being made from demolition products and that. So, you know, looking at maybe a hybrid method is the best method to try and diversify your risk. So really I'm concerned about the MMC itself, where you're getting it from, who's creating it, how's it being shipped in, what wood's it being used, and also putting everyone wanting to put their eggs in that one basket. How is that going to be done? Takes a long time for that to... Yeah, the certification, yes.
Two certifications systems. The first is FSC, which is the Forest Stewardship Council, it's a UK-based one. The other one is PEFC. There are minor differences between them as far as I'm concerned. Any timber that says it's from a registered source, it's FSC or PEFC, I'm fairly happy with that. So actually by using MMC and being involved in the actual factory construction of these panels, what we end up doing is streamlining our supply chain. The thing with FSC is it's only as good as the chain of custody that goes behind it. What we do by doing MMC and being in control of that first section is that takes out a couple of links between us and the forest. So it's easier for me to be able to find out and be certain that every bit of timber that arrives on our site is certified.
You also touched on where we're going to make it. At the moment, the company we use are located just north of London. We are looking at an enterprise zone, possibly somewhere like Swindon, where you've got the car plants possibly closing, to use the skilled labour there to actually start our own factory. And that may be 2 or 3 years away, but that's our intention. As once we've actually proved the system works, we'll then build our own factory, manufacture our own timber frame, using our own timber from sources we can justify, and hopefully reuse some labour that's there, because that will help the skill shortage. And workforce and their rights, by being in control of that process, we can be more certain of it than we would if someone else was doing it for us. So it's about us taking responsibility for that, and I think that's very important as well.
Councillor Hess.
Hello, good evening. I really applaud what you're doing. Just wish every other developer would follow your example. Just got a couple of questions. Your off-site panelised system, is it what I know as SIPs, structural insulated panels? And I've got a couple of other things I wanted to ask as well. It's a real shame that the rainwater harvesting is not liked by some of the operators because of the pumping and additional tech. because along with grey water, we need to be looking to conserve drinking water in the future. With climate emergency, we don't know, with a growing population, we might run into water shortages in this country, and we shouldn't really be flushing toilets with drinking water. So I just make that point. And I just wanted to ask whether in your bigger developments, which are not semi-detached or terraced houses, whether every unit on your development have provision for electric vehicle charging points, every single unit, whether it's an apartment or a flat.
So I'll answer the one on the car charging, if that's all right. I keep forgetting that. So on the car charging point, all houses with driveways have got their own charging point. That's very easy to achieve. We can do that. The ones that are tricky, are quite right, are your terrace ones that don't have a car parking space right outside the house, apartments and things like that. So each house has access to one, and they're usually in communal bays. We don't provide them in with one for everyone because speaking to a number of experts, actually the range is extending so much on electric cars that it would be wasteful of us to put every space to have its own point. It's most likely that 2 years' time you won't be charging your car every day. And obviously there are a number of people that don't have electric cars yet, but it's most likely you've bought your last petrol engine or diesel engine car, which is quite exciting. But yeah, talking about the car charging infrastructure, it's unlikely for you to need one in every space. So there is provision enough for it to be more than fine for the future.
Your question on the SIPS panel is, the SIPS panel is a very old description of an insulated panel. Yes, this is a version of it, if you like, because that description covers a vast way, whether it be metal frame, timber frame, or any other substance. So yes, it is a type of SIPS panel.
Can I just come back on that? I'd like you to know I've been living in a SIPS panel house for the last 6 years. It's highly efficient, costs next to nothing to heat. It's a brilliant house. We didn't quite match your build time. It was 6 days from slab to a weather-tight shell. And luckily we had dry weather, so totally dry, brilliant.
Stuart touched on the point earlier on. If you were to go and buy a car and somebody told you that your car was going to be made in a muddy field, there was a chance it filled with water somewhere in production, but don't worry, we'll pump water out and sell you a nice car, you wouldn't buy that car. With a house, people still go and buy a house that has been potentially flooded with water at some point because it was built in the pouring rain. So I think your point is very relevant. We're trying to get rid of the biggest risk to house building, and that is the moving the house with shrinkage, etc., etc.
Okay, Patrick Arthurs, and then Councillors Penny Marriott and Peter Marriott.
Thanks, Fiona. Patrick Arthurs, Major Sites Consultant. Thank you for your presentation. I think you've made something that is a very technical subject, very simple and easy to understand, and it's great to see all those elements coming together. I guess the first question is, all of the technologies there today, how as we, as a planning authority, how can we encourage you to make sure that that is implemented today and not in 5 years' time as a starting point? I think also the authority has declared a climate emergency. Obviously, the policy is evolving and changing in order to address that consideration. Obviously, coming out of the back of that, we and the planning department and some of the members who sit around this table who sit on the planning committees will need to take into account some of the design considerations that fall out of the back of that in relation to the materials that we use, in relation to the tensions that invariably arise in relation to the Surrey vernacular and how we can maintain the Surrey vernacular but ensure that we move towards more sustainable products. I think that's something that we within the planning team will be grappling with, no doubt, in the years to come. But if you've got any pointers or suggestions now, that would be great to make us start thinking about it. And I think it's one thing looking at carbon neutral houses. I think there's also another thing called trying to create sustainable communities and more sustainable formats within our built environment, and particularly with the larger schemes that we're seeing coming forward. So, we're looking at things like communal gardens for growing, to reduce the carbon footprint of the food that we eat. We're looking at also an increase in the biodiversity and the enhancement through that. So any little cues that you may have from schemes that you're working on today or perhaps have visited in the past will also just throw down some markers for us in terms of developing our policies and our thought process as we move forward. Thank you.
Measures is that it comes at a cost, and by undertaking these measures you put yourself at commercial disadvantage. So if we were to incorporate all these into a house at this stage that nobody else was doing, our house would be more than everybody else's houses, and therefore you'd question why you would do it. I think your point is very valid. If your planning required these measures, then you'd level the playing field. So if everyone had to put PV on the roof, everyone had to do whatever the measures were, then you would actually help us, because you'll level the playing field for us. At the moment, if we lead and do all these measures and no one else does, we are going to effectively handicap ourselves. We're happy to lead on it, but there of course there is always a commercial level which we can't exceed.
The perfect case in point there is car charging points. You know, a few years ago, that was never seen coming through as a clear planning condition. Now, more and more planning consents will come through with a condition that says you will put car charging points into whatever number of plots. So again, you're starting to level up the playing field for anyone acquiring that site to deliver to that standard.
And on the sustainable communities point, obviously there's lots of interesting stuff you can do. I only included a few bits in here. So all of these have sustainable community efforts that link in with it, but we try to champion with local bus companies to try and get them to take on hydrogen buses. On larger developments, we'll fund electric bikes, and we'll give every customer a £200, £300 voucher to go towards that. Lift share is another great one. Yeah, things like allotments work really well. Providing community facilities early is so important. There's no point waiting until everyone's moved in and then disrupt everyone and then say, oh, it's something that you can use now. They should be using that from day one. Those facilities should be built ready for them so that when they move in, it feels like home. Oh, and then, yeah, maintaining the vernacular. From an external finishes point of view, we can do many things.
Yeah, because that's the point I make earlier on. There are a lot of materials coming forward that we can use that will mirror as close as we can the current sort of finishes you're all used to. So yeah. we're not proposing every single house looks identical. We still want variation. And of course, a lot of what we use on the outside is timber, and we've discussed that it's actually a very good material. This is a zero carbon home, but it doesn't need to look like BedZ. If you know that.
What are your thoughts on fake chimneys?
It's not for me, Matt.
The problem with fake chimneys are most of them are GRP, which again is not a great material. But as a planner, you'll probably understand that a lot of the time we are requested to put chimneys on, even though they're non-functional, because they match what people are used to seeing. So I think there's an education there to say, look, do we really need a chimney on every property? I know quite often, and you'll know this from a planning point of view, they say, well, put it on the first 2 or 3 you see as you're driving at the site. So you're doing it for the wrong reason, really. It's highly visual, but it's not achieving anything. We rarely install working fireplaces on any development. I can't remember the last time we did actually install working fireplace anymore. So they are a dying thing. So I think we would have to educate you, and you'd have to educate people that they're just no longer required. You're putting them there for show rather than for a function.
I mean, one thing that we haven't explored really yet is the use of roof tiles that come ready set in. They're not set on the external, but they're fitted. And I mean, obviously the issue is cost, and we're told that all the time. But where do you see the cost economy of that coming down to make it cost efficient to do so? When's that time likely to arrive?
Do you mean solar tiles? Oh, okay. Tesla have just brought some out. They look very nice. They've got ridged ones. They look lovely. Cost prohibitive, definitely. And unless you could guarantee, I'm sure the product will be out in 10 years' time, and you'll have a range of stuff that you can pick from that matches the local vernacular, and we won't have this problem. But actually, when we think of younger generations coming through, are they really that bothered about seeing a solar panel, or is it, wow, you've got a solar panel? I think there's I think there's a discussion to be had there that actually it's an attractive feature of a house. Oh, yeah, I know you're disagreeing. That's okay. That's okay.
Okay, Penny Marriott, Peter Marriott, Christine Howard, Paul Follows.
Hi, we're sitting here today in a very cold climate, and we're thinking about how you keep the heat in. But in fact, global warming means that, doesn't it? It means it's going to get warmer, and our summers are going to be hotter. In what way does your standard home, if you like, allow for somebody who wants to actually open the window because they want to be cool? I know it doesn't, in fact. What you need is the heat pump so that you can cool it, or something inside to cool it. Have you thought of that sort of
Yeah,
thing?
absolutely. So the MVHR systems, obviously I was talking about keeping the heat in, but you have a summer mode on it, which means it takes the heat out of the stale air in the house and can get rid of it. So what you're bringing in is fresh, cool, filtered air. The other thing about the triple glazing is as good as it is at keeping air and heat in, it's also good at keeping heat out, so it doesn't feel like a greenhouse, essentially. So yes, they have dual functions. It keeps the heat in, keeps the heat out. Oh, and then air source heat pumps, if you get to that stage and you want to put those in, they come with cooling functions as well. So your radiator, essentially, rather than being hot because you want it to be warm, will be colder than the air temperature to take the heat out. That's just a standard function of most of them now, which is good.
Peter Marriott.
Yes, thank you. Interesting presentations. We have an electric car and solar batteries, solar panels on the roof, but we don't have a battery because of the cost. And I suspect also because the carbon footprint of a battery is enormous compared to the things you're talking about. Maybe some idea of what that is in practice would be useful. I don't know what it is for the battery I have, for the panels I have, and how much I would need to do for a battery. Now, the battery, I mean, our panels, I suppose, typically a panel, 16 panels of 250 watt hours is equivalent to about 10,000 miles in a standard car. So you need a few more to fully power a vehicle like that. Of course, you can't get all that power from the sun because it's mostly the summer, and you don't have it in the winter. So you need a big battery if you wanted to fully power an electric vehicle from panels. But that's just a comment, you know. I'm just interested in your designs because your designs look very traditional, and I wonder whether you've looked at more exotic designs, more glass, where you can use direct solar heating, and you see some of the futuristic designs based on that principle. And in that context, solar heating, solar water heating on the roof, and you see that a lot in the continent. Is that in your design, or could it be in your design? And then finally, you mentioned carbon credits. If when you can't meet the zero carbon target, could you just explain a bit about that? Because I know it's a sort of there's a bit of a fix to say you're neutral, but you're not actually neutral in the sense you are producing CO2. Yeah, could you just go down that an explanation of that, please?
Fakenham are known for a traditional, if you like, the sort of the chocolate box house that we'd expect in Surrey, Sussex villages, and we're keen to be able to still deliver that even with a modern method. But you are right, there is a home for a more modern, glassy look. We have developed that to another level at Pease Pottage, where we're actually running two brands. So we've got a brand that's called Fakenham, which is pretty traditional, but we've got another brand that's called Alfium, which is much more modern, and it's not just in the look, it's also what it delivers. So it's got lots more USB points. We talked about technology, it's got the Alexa and things like that, but it's got no grass in the garden, because the people who buy it, I think out of the first 10 we sold, 9 of them were sold to people under 29, which actually surprised us. We thought it'd be nearer 39 than 29. But these people, they want to live in the house. They're not so much worried about what's around it, and they like those very clean looks. So this has got bigger, taller windows and things like that. It is a more modern-looking house, and that can be accommodated in exactly the same modern method of construction. So we can accommodate both, and I think the art of a good MMC is that it can be adapted to pick up lots of different designs rather than boxes which just have to be a modular size, and the biggest limit on that size is transport. So if you make a big box, a container, I think it's 4.2 metres is the maximum you can put on a lorry without having to be escorted. Well, that means your house is going to be 4.2 metres wide or 8.4, etc., etc. Our timber system, we can make any panel from 1 metre to 12. And because we're laying it flat, it's still only 2.4 high, which is the room height. So we haven't got the same limits on transport. So we can be very, very flexible.
Okay, so you talked about battery storage a lot. I actually think you're more likely to see commercial sized batteries than you are domestic ones. It's unlikely that you'll have like an off-grid house as your standard generic house. There's general efficiencies in making things bigger, so you'll see battery parks, you'll see stuff like that. We're just not there yet. The industry isn't there yet, and that's something that people like E.ON are looking at, which is quite interesting. You talked about carbon credits. That's a very good point. As a business, we're committed to absolutely only having verified carbon standards. So companies like Woodland Trust, like Gold Standard, these are the best companies with the most verifiable. You have spent this amount of money, it has offset this amount. It's got to be transparent. As a company, it will be on our website. We can absolutely talk about what we are funding and where it's gone to. But beyond that, we still want to fund local schemes. We want to get involved in tree planting in our local area so that we're not just paying for other stuff elsewhere. But the first bit of it has to be verified. The other stuff is just extra.
Could you, can you sort of give an indication of what the shortfall could be or is likely to be in that context?
For making the homes carbon neutral in production, not really, no.
As I explained earlier on, that 50-tonne figure, we are working to get it down. We've probably got around half of it identified that we can save at the moment. The rest of it will still have to be offset by planting trees, and Josie said we would look to do that as close to the source of the property as we could. We're talking to people like the Goodwood Estate, who plant trees all the time. That's in Sussex. We can probably find a similar home here in Surrey, and then if we need to plant X number of trees to mitigate that last bit, at the moment that is the only viable solution. But the journey is continuing, and we hope to get that down lower and lower towards zero.
The scale of it is very project dependent. So if I based it off housing type A, I could tell you, but that still wouldn't be accurate. And I'd want to get my numbers right.
Christine Howard, and then Paul follows.
Hello. I don't know about ground heat source, which you see a lot in Scandinavia. Is that an option here for us? I was thinking particularly for fuel poverty, it would help for council housing.
So yeah, you're right. It's seen done a lot more across Europe. In this country, there are areas of it that it does work. It sometimes depends on the level of the water table, depends on how much heat you're going to be able to extract. That's why air source heat pump is functionally easier. It's easier to install. It's not dependent on a lot of things. People like Mitsubishi have been doing it for so long. They've got some really good products, and they've finally figured out how to explain it to customers and developers to make sure it's done right.
I just want to say thank you for coming and presenting this evening. I think one of the things I take away from you particularly is that you do actually care about this yourself. And that is very good to see. From my perspective, people who care about things don't stay at companies that don't care about things for very long without moving on. I still at least self-identify as one of the younger members of the council in many ways. So I would not be as averse to living in things such as Passive House, and I'm not worried about the look of solar panels. I do actually think it says other things. It makes a statement in its own right. And I also I also think that many of us in this room would love to change central planning regulations to ensure a more even playing field, because I think we would love more developers to be doing this, and we would love central government to be making more developers do this all the time, not just by exception, and not by making councils effectively pick up the cost variance that we will almost certainly be willing to pay to do this, not just because it's the right thing to do environmentally, but also because it generates savings for our residents. So almost certainly councils will pick up that tab, but central government should be doing more, and I expect a decent proportion of this room agree with that. I think it's fantastic actually that so many of us are in this room. I think it shows actually that we've changed a bit in the last year, that we're actually having this discussion in this room, that the housing, environment and planning departments have effectively been unleashed to deliver this sort of policy. So thank you very much for coming this evening. I just wanted to say I hope we can continue the good work we've been doing at Oxford Ridge. Louise and I have been doing a very high school passing of notes across regarding sums. So my hope is that we can start to explore some of this and make it financially work. I can speak for some of the administration certainly, and I doubt many of the others would disagree. But certainly this is something I want to be pursuing as much as we possibly can.
That's great. Thank you for going on easy on me on the questions. If you've got any others, I'm more than happy to answer, even if it's about your house at home. It doesn't matter. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really pleased to be working with Thacum. You can't fake this. The enthusiasm that's coming from the top of this business is not, you can't just make that happen. So I'm really pleased that they've embraced this, and I'm really excited that councils are too. So thank you.
Thank you. So the first thing I was going to ask our councillors to do was to thank you in the time apportioned way, but that's happened. Just to say that we have our next member briefing on the 4th of March, where the Town and Country Planning Association will be with us, helping us as councillors, helping you as councillors to be as robust as you can be in planning committees and try to move the agenda forward and make developers follow in the pathway of Thacum in terms of sustainability, and also in terms of ensuring that we deliver the right kind of housing to rent and to buy for our residents. Also, Site A is going well, and we will be opening show homes for councillors to come and look at during April, where Thacum will be there, we will be there. You'll be invited to that. Please come and have a look at the outstanding quality of our new council homes. So thank you very much for coming, councillors. Thank you so much for so many of you coming. It's really encouraged Louisa and Irina and I in the work that we're doing, and thanks to our friends at Thacum.